Well, this was supposed to be a live stream. Hello and welcome once again to the Cap Ball Saloon. I am, of course, your host, Anders E.T. Herzberg. Today on the Saloon, we have a ton of topics to go over. Since we did skip a week, and the reason why we did skip a week is because I just released this past Saturday a video on the history of the 10mm auto. If you have not checked that out, I would highly recommend you do. It's 30 minutes. We go over a ton of history, some of the most popular and historic firearms that chamber the round, and where it sits today. But on to today's show. Now, this was supposed to be a live stream, but unfortunately it looks like Rumble Studio was not going to play nice with me this evening. So instead, we are going to be recording this video. But first on our topics for today is actually a PSA for the FFLs out there. The Franklin Armory Reformation has launched, and it is out there in the wild now. Now, this is one of those kinds of loophole guns that are floating around, and basically it's meant to kind of sail right through the SBR, SBS language of the Gun Control Act and the ATF, etc. But the reason why this came up on my radar is because of this post here in r/guns on Reddit. Basically, to make a long story short, it looks like the FFL had absolutely no idea what they were looking at and decided to get the ATF involved, delaying the whole process massively. So my personal recommendation, while I do appreciate that the FFL is trying to cover their butts on this particular thing, take a look around, see what you actually have before you get into a situation where you have a r/guns post with over 400 upvotes saying that your FFL has no idea what it's doing, essentially. This kind of bad PR is something that is relatively easy to avoid, and again, I do appreciate that the FFL is literally just trying to cover their butts, but this is something that I'm pretty sure a quick Google search probably would have been able to correct, unfortunately. But with that quick PSA for FFLs out of the way, let's move on to our next topic. And for our next topic, unfortunately, there have been a few passings within the firearms industry, and a couple of big names have been lost recently. First up, we'll talk about Wiley Clapp. So, for those of you who are not familiar, Wiley was a massively prolific writer. He had a ton of articles that he wrote over the years, and he spent 20 years writing for Shooting Illustrated. He also, because of his prolific nature, wrote under the pen name Ken S. Latrins. This was inspired by the Canis latrans, the scientific name for the common coyote. A couple of firearms that you may be familiar with that he actually helped work on was the Wiley Clapp CCO 1911 that he worked on with Colt, and Ruger also produced with him a special edition of the GP 100. He is survived by his wife Nancy, and unfortunately, he did pass away on June 4th of 2025. But unfortunately, he is not the only name to have passed recently that has some standing within the firearms community. Frank Brownells of Brownells fame has also recently passed away as well. Quoting from X, Brownells sadly announces the death of longtime family patriarch Frank Brownell, who successively held the positions of president, CEO, and chairman of the board at Brownells. If you ever knew Frank or ever shook his hand at SHOT Show, we'd love to hear your story. spend a little time at the bench, share a memory, or help inspire the next generation of gunsmiths. That's how he'd want to be remembered. Again, another big name who's had a outsized impact on the firearms community has been lost. And for both Wiley and Mr. Brownell's families, I do hope that they are doing all right. So for our next topic, we'll be going over where things now stand with T-Rex Arms. So it's been a couple of weeks now since the original announcement of Lucas leaving, and I think now that the dust has settled, there is an opportunity here where we can take a look at how things have shaken out and potentially learn some lessons. I do think that the bottom line here is that, unfortunately, Lucas's family, it really does look like they ended up taking advantage of him and forcing him out of the company. Well, I don't think that the incident that kind of inspired this whole thing, it really is the end all be all. I think it's the thing that too many people are focusing on, when really there were much deeper rooted issues at play here that prompted Lucas to leave. If it was literally just the incident with his wife being sent inappropriate images, I don't think he would have left. And honestly, I think that if it was just that thing, it would be much more forgivable if the company was having a hard time figuring out exactly what they should do in terms of how to handle this particular situation. I could very much imagine, in fairness to T-Rex Arms, that this is probably the first time that they're having to deal with this kind of situation, and them not handling it well, by their own admission, very much is understandable. However, what I do think is a problem is when they go out on a live stream with their representative and start having him play whataboutisms with things like, actually, Brandon Wombat, or however you say his last name, I think as much as he stepped into a really difficult situation and put himself in the eye of the storm, as it was, the whole going after Lucas for company handbook infractions, but then never actually saying what those infractions were, really doesn't seem like the kind of thing that should have happened. And on top of that, I don't think it should have been Brandon stepping into the breach. I think he's brave for doing that, maybe a little foolish, but I don't think that it should have been Brandon out there. I think, if anything, it probably should have been Lucas's brother Isaac going out and trying to do the charm PR campaign for T-Rex Arms. Because otherwise it looks like somebody who's getting paid by the company, just an employee, saying, "Oh, T-Rex Arms, we're still cool. Like, we don't have a problem, da 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 da." When in reality, I think that most of the people who are supporting Lucas and falling on his side of things are looking at the whole situation and saying, yeah, there's probably a reason why Lucas left. And at the end of the day, I really do hope that Lucas and his family are able to reconcile. I don't think it's a great thing whenever people end up splitting and there's these kind of family drama things, but I really do hope that this is a situation that can be rectified. Lucas and his family can, kind of go their own separate ways for a little bit and then come back together in a better place for everyone. But it does seem like Lucas has been doing a lot of learning. He's published a few different videos, done at least a couple of interviews from what I've seen, and I do think that there are some actual functional business things that can be learned for, people who are FFLs or just in business in general. I think the biggest thing that we can learn here, and I think Lucas would definitely agree, is don't sell off a major chunk of ownership without something major in return. That equity deal, I think, is the beginning of where things started to go south for Lucas, and it took him many years to actually realize it, because that equity deal was done with family. I mean, ideally, supposed to be looking out for your best interests. And unfortunately, sometimes that means they may be thinking that they're looking out for your best interests in their heads. And that's how they justify these things to themselves. But at the end of the day, they end up doing you more harm than good. So I really would caution people to, if you are considering going into business with family or sharing equity in a business in any meaningful way with family, really consider what that means and how difficult those things are to navigate. One of the things that Lucas also talked about in his video, somewhat briefly as a point of contention within T-Rex Arms between him and the rest of the founders, is something that I think is worth talking about, specifically conflict over product selection. I think Lucas was spot on about not devaluing the brand by bringing in cheap product offerings as part of their selection. If you build a brand like T-Rex Arms, who ideally is going to be doing highly curated product lines and not just pricing to win and pricing to the lowest possible price point, you can't compromise that particular brand proposition. You have to be known for having quality products. You might have a good value proposition, but you can't just bring in cheap products willy-nilly just because you start to want to hit specific price points as part of your product offerings so that things are less expensive to expand your market. That's not how you do things. Another lesson that I think can be learned is don't badmouth your founder. I think that this could have been very different if Isaac had stepped forward and said that this was just a family growing apart. Everyone still loved Lucas, but a poorly handled and ongoing disagreement were getting to the point where a big change had to be made, and Lucas decided it was best to leave and start something new. Isaac should have been out there saying he has our full support and we will miss him. That should have been the message. But Isaac's video ended up preemptively confirming part of what Lucas was going to say in his next video, or in his first video on his channel. And then you top that off with Brandon's comments about Isaac's behavior, and you end up looking like the bad guys even more so. Yeah, I do think that T-Rex Arms right now, their best bet is to just be quiet, just let things kind of blow over, let something else pop up in the news cycle, and just continue to try and ride out the storm as best they can. That's their best bet. But as far as for Lucas's side of things, I do hope that he is successful in his endeavors, and I do support the fact that he is trying to assist, at least in one of his new business endeavors, in helping grow and market American manufacturing. I think that's something that is severely underserved. I see the same kind of niche. That's why I started Cap and Ball Digital Strategies, because I see the exact same kind of problem with the digital marketing industry, where it has no idea how to serve this particular segment. Because I mean, what digital marketer is going to know what a C-clamp is, or the difference between open versus red dot emitters? I mean, come on. But I think that does kind of wrap up a lot of the particular thoughts that I had on the T-Rex Arms situation. I've been kind of going back and forth over, who do I believe more? What's kind of the story here? What can we kind of tease out as far as like actual possibilities go? And for the most part, I tend to fall on the side of Lucas in this particular thing. I think that T-Rex Arms can still grow and survive as a company, but their best bet, again, is to just be quiet, ride out the storm, and really think long and hard about how they want to continue to approach the situation, because I think their previous kind of approach has not worked. I think their best bet, like best possibility out there, is for Lucas to turn around and say, like, hey, they're okay. It's okay to buy from T-Rex. I think that's probably their best bet for things to turn around quickly. But let's move on to our next topic. So for our next topic, we're going to be talking about Smith & Wesson's big 2A win. Today, quoting from Smith & Wesson's ex-host, today's unanimous Supreme Court decision shutting down this ridiculous lawsuit against our company represents not only a big win for Smith & Wesson, but our industry, American sovereignty, and most importantly, every American who wishes to exercise his or her Second Amendment rights. So, for those of you who are not familiar, there has been a lawsuit by the state of Mexico, somehow, against Smith & Wesson over their sales of firearms. So, what's laughable about this whole thing is it really never should have gotten off the ground. It should have started with the lower courts saying, no, get out of here. There is PLACA, the Peaceable Lawful Commerce in Arms Act or whatever. Basically, it's supposed to protect firearms manufacturers from these exact kind of frivolous lawsuits, and the fact that it did not get stopped at the lower courts, I think is an indictment of those lower courts and their obvious Second Amendment biases. Fortunately, the Supreme Court has said unequivocally, no, we are not going to allow this to continue any further, and we're not going to rule on the side of Mexico. Let's take a quick look at a few things that I had highlighted here in their judgment. So, because Mexico's complaint does not plausibly allege that the defendant gun manufacturers aided and abetted gun dealers' unlawful sale of firearms to Mexican traffickers, PLACA bars the lawsuit. That's exactly the way it should be. Unfortunately, it wasn't just Mexico and the other plaintiffs alleging that Smith & Wesson was knowingly giving firearms to or indirectly knowing that they were indirectly selling firearms to the cartels. You see how weird this logic is? I can barely even follow it myself. But not only do they say that PLACA bars it, but they also get into some of the other things here. Against the backdrop of that law, Mexico's complaint does not plausibly allege that the defendant manufacturers aided and abetted gun dealers' unlawful sale of firearms to Mexican traffickers. To begin, the complaint sets for itself a high bar. It does not pinpoint, as most aiding and abetting claims do, any specific criminal transactions that the defendants allegedly assisted. I wonder if there are any criminal transactions that actually were assisted. Fast and Furious, anyone? I wonder why they aren't trying to sue the ATF over Fast and Furious. Probably because this is a politically motivated lawsuit. However, to get back to the actual statement from SCOTUS, instead it levels a more general accusation that all the manufacturers assist some number of unidentified rogue dealers in violation of various illegal bars. The systemic nature of that charge cannot help but heighten Mexico's burden. To survive, it must be backed by plausible allegations of pervasive, systemic, and culpable assistance. It's far from clear that such behavior without more could ever account as aiding and abetting under the court's precedent. And in any event, Mexico has not said enough to make its allegations on this point plausible. It does not confront that the manufacturers do not directly supply any dealers, and its complaint does not name alleged bad apple dealers or provide any grounds for thinking that anyone up the supply chain often acquires that information. What Mexico has plausibly alleged is only that manufacturers know some identified dealers routinely violate the law, but this describes indifference rather than assistance, similar to the insufficient allegations in Twitter. Now, the Supreme Court's opinion continues on further and does talk about the Twitter case. Specifically, the Twitter case was a lawsuit alleging that Twitter was culpable for ISIS attacks because ISIS uses Twitter. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's not a thing. And while I'm not generally on the side of social media, I do think that was the correct decision. Again, it's like suing the car manufacturer because somebody ran you over with a car. You see the lack of logic here? Honestly, I wish that the judgment from the Supreme Court had been a little bit stronger and had been a little bit clearer of what PLACA actually bars and made it difficult for the lower courts to bring a suit like this forward up to the Supreme Court again. I'm unfortunately sure that we will probably see another lawsuit like this end up being adjudicated simply because the lower courts don't want to enforce PLACA or this particular Supreme Court ruling. But only time will tell. However, in the meantime, there are a number of other things that we can talk about as far as legal news and the Second Amendment. The Trump administration is being sued by a number of states over FRTs, and unfortunately, this includes my home state of Nevada as well. I unfortunately have a rogue DA that seems to think that force reset triggers are machine guns, because of course he knows absolutely nothing about how firearms work. Quoting from the Associated Press here, 16 states have sued the Trump administration over its plan to allow the sale of forced reset triggers that make semi-automatic rifles fire more rapidly and return devices already seized to their owners. The suit announced Monday argues that returning the triggers would violate federal law, pose a threat to residents and law enforcement, and worsen gun violence. It was filed in federal court in Maryland. There have been several legal battles over the devices, yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada. So, if you are in the following states, your district attorney does not think that you have Second Amendment rights. They are Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey. Other states involved are Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington, along with the District of Corruption. I knew this was going to come. Some goofy fuckery was going to happen with the forced reset trigger decision, and of course it's the usual suspects. But what really chafes my hide in particular is that Nevada is on this list. Now, Nevada is kind of a weird state. A little bit libertarian, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. But we've generally been pretty friendly about firearms. However, with us slowly turning purple because of all of the California refugees who come over here and then vote the exact same way, not learning from experience, unfortunately, yeah, we're just, I guess, another one of those states. I'm probably going to have to move, aren't I? Well, I hope not. In the meantime, I fortunately do have an opportunity to get rid of this particular clown who is up for re-election once again in, I believe it is 2026. Let me check and see here. Yes, 2026. He will be back up for re-election. And hopefully he will not be wasting my tax money filing suit against YouTube over, let's see, harming Nevada's youth. Sure, that sounds like a great, great use of my taxpayer dollars. No anti-monopoly suits, no censorship suits. No, YouTube's harming the youth. Right. Um Ford, I sincerely hope and I will be trying to make sure that you don't get reelected. Have fun. But of course that wraps up our topics for this. Let's move on to the next bit, which is actually a little bit of good news. H.R. 38 is currently working its way through Congress. This is actually a constitutional concealed carry bill. So let's take a quick look at the language that's included in it and see what we have here. So H.R. 38 for the 119th Congress. Basically, a act that may be cited as the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Basically, this would force a national reciprocity, but if I'm reading this right, then if a state that is constitutional carry only with no licensing scheme at all, that's an important bit. If there's no licensing scheme, then the driver's license would be your concealed carry license. However, the bit that is important here, of a state which permits the person to carry a concealed firearm or is entitled to carry a concealed firearm in the state which the persons reside may possess or carry a concealed handgun that has been shipped or transported in interstate foreign commerce in any state that yada yada yada. But basically, so long as they don't have a licensing scheme, your state's constitutional carry, this sounds like your driver's license would end up being your CCW permit. I think there's one, maybe two states off the top of my head that have constitutional carry but no licensing scheme. So this is an interesting bill. I'm not entirely sure what the actual odds are of it passing, but this does also have some teeth in it, which is nice. Quoting here, a person who is deprived of any right, privilege, or immunity secured by this section under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or political subdivision thereof may bring an action in appropriate court against any other person, including a state or political subdivision thereof, who caused the person to be subject to the deprivation for damages or other approved relief. So basically, if a gun to a unfriendly state messed with you for carrying under this particular law and you're from out of state, you would have recourse and you would actually be able to get damages back. So this is something that I do hope passes. However, I think that most of the attention right now is on the big, beautiful bill and the fact that suppressors and short-barreled rifles and shotguns are actually back on the menu. So the short act, fortunately, has been brought back into the big, beautiful bill. And while it is still somewhat early for this particular change, there is still a number of things that need to happen before we're able to actually see it and see if these particular changes will get out of committee and actually onto the floor. This is a promising sign. I do want to take a moment to shout out Only Tactical Fans on YouTube. This is Miss CRS Firearms YouTube channel. She's been growing it. They are now up to 5.24 or K subscribers, and it's pretty cool to see them grow. Definitely deserve it. But I did see her covering that, so this particular bit with silencers potentially coming off the NFA, as well as short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to give this a little bit of a shout out. But that does wrap things up for this particular section. We do have one more legal thing to cover that we can talk about, and we'll do that next. So we do actually have a little bit of a win from the Ninth Circuit Court. However, I do think that this is probably going to be somewhat of a temporary win. Let's celebrate what we can. A channel that I've actually recently found, Stambulith Law, I think is how you pronounce it, has coverage on this, and I thought this was rather interesting, but apparently the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals actually struck down California's one gun a month law and said, no, you can't restrict somebody to just one firearm per month to be purchased. That's ridiculous. Sanity from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? This is mind-boggling. But knowing California, they are probably going to end up turning right back around and fighting this in court all over again. Well, unfortunately, this will probably end up getting overturned. Then it's probably going to have to end up going back up to SCOTUS, and hopefully SCOTUS will be like, no, this is stupid. I sincerely hope so. I mean, they have been somewhat firearm friendly in the past, but it has been rather annoying that they have not taken up any new firearms laws, specifically some of the cases over magazine capacity sizes previously. But we'll see how this shakes out. At least for the moment, we can say, hey, we got a win out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, even if it's temporary. I know. It's probably not going to end up being something that sticks, but hey, I guess we can celebrate the little wins. But Stambulith Law, they do seem to be kind of a cool YouTube channel, so I did want to point them out. He has been talking about a number of firearms-related lawsuits, legal movements, and it is nice to have another legal voice who's familiar with firearms out there that I can point somebody to and say, hey, they seem to be doing pretty good work. Go check them out if you haven't. Let me know what you guys think. And as far as legal topics for today's episode, that wraps everything up. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are about all of the different cases that we've covered, the different laws, as well as the states that are suing to stop the FRTs from being returned to their rightful owners and the FRT settlement from going through properly. Are you guys in, unfortunately, one of those states like I am that seems to think that the Second Amendment is a second-class right? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. But let's move on to our next topic. So for our next topic, we are going to be talking about SIG again. Unfortunately, I really want to stop talking about SIG, but they seem to be doing something kind of weird. So instead of directly addressing, backpedaling, or otherwise dealing with the SIG P320 uncommanded discharge issues, they seem to be going on a little bit of a charm offensive and hoping that no one will notice and very quickly forget when they jingle the shiny keys. The first of the three shiny keys that they have is the P226 Modernized. This is a slightly different optics-ready P226. Apparently there have been some slight changes to the trigger design, double action, single action, optics ready. This feels a lot like SIG's trying to be like, hey, remember when we actually made good guns? We're going to bring back one of your favorites. Will you forgive us? No, SIG. No, I won't forgive you, even if you bring in a 5.16 Mohawk AR piston rifle. I mean, look, AR piston rifles are cool, but I mean, you guys have done so much damage to your own reputation that I'm not really sure that a good suppressor host is going to really make me rethink my decision to not want to give you guys any more money in the future. Seriously, I want to like SIG stuff, but until you guys backpedal and get rid of your current leadership who have put you into this particular situation, I'm not too terribly interested in giving you guys my hard-earned money. Not even for the P211, which is probably the most interesting one of the bunch. I mean, on paper, I should be really interested in this. This is a SIG 2011 take that takes P320 magazines, so something that's already relatively common here, and has comped options, optics ready, hammer fired 1911, 2011-ish style pistol. Like, this should be something that I should be excited about. But instead, I'm thinking to myself, meh? I mean, I'm not met out on 2011 pistols. I know plenty of people are, but seriously, SIG, these three items, the P226 re-release, the P2011, and the 516 aren't going to make people forget overnight about your crummy actions. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to forget and forgive when you guys still have the same leadership there. Change your leadership, then we can talk. But much like how Ruger screwed themselves over by supporting the Gun Control Act and made things very difficult for them for quite a while, with Bill Ruger being public about his support for the Gun Control Act, SIG, I think, needs to be given the same kind of treatment until they change their leadership and turn around and eat crow. But until such time as that happens, I'm not really interested in giving them any more money. What about you guys? Are you charmed by SIG's charm offensive here? Are you interested in any of these pistols, like, or the 516 like I am, but don't want to spend money with SIG? Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are on SIG's latest moves. But let's move on to our next topic. All right, and for our last topic, I'm going to be going over a dirt cheap process for social media management for FFLs or anyone else in the 2A space. This is for somebody who has like $0 marketing budget. Generally, I would recommend using a dedicated social media management platform. One that I have been using and am relatively happy with is OneUp. This particular social media management platform, not too terribly expensive. These stuff like Hootsuite can get kind of crazy, but at least on OneUp, 10 accounts are only $18 a month and less if you go annually. So at least that's something that's reasonably affordable for most people who really don't have a huge marketing budget. But if you're trying to get started and have zero marketing budget or just kind of want to keep things organized, I do have a little bit of a strategy suggestion here for you. So the way that I kind of game plan out everything is through using a folder structure. Let me make sure that I'm not showing off any client materials. Okay. So what I do is I have a dedicated folder for social media content, and I just keep this super simple and super basic. I have a month, and then inside of that month, I create folders for each day of the month, and I snag stuff and drop it into the folder for that particular day. That way I can easily organize things, know what's supposed to be scheduled for what day for the various platforms that I'm leveraging and using. Helps keep things organized, but it's a simple bootstrap $0 kind of way to manage your social media if you don't have the budget for a dedicated social media management tool like a Hootsuite or something along those lines. But but hopefully that kind of gives you guys some kind of an idea for how you can easily manage your social media content and not have to go overboard with a social media management tool that costs you potentially hundreds and hundreds of dollars per month. There are less expensive options out there, like the one up that I was just talking about, and you can do a little bit of your own social media management with a simple folder structure like what I showed you here. But that wraps up all of our topics for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode. I did want this to be a live stream. However, Rumble Studio just didn't want to cooperate with me, but I'll keep messing around with it, try and figure out what exactly went wrong, and hopefully next time we can do this live with your guys' feedback. But of course, until next time, I'm Anders, E.T. Hersberg, for the Cap Ball Saloon, hoping to see you all again real soon.